building a better Bay Area for a safe and secure future. This is ABC7 News.
Hi there, I'm Kristen Z. Welcome to our daily program called Getting Answers. We're asking experts your question every day at 3 o'clock to get answers for you in real time. Now, we don't want to waste any time today because we have the Superintendent of Public Education in California, Tony Thurmond, with us. So you want to post your questions on our Facebook live stream, YouTube Live, or check out our Instagram stories to submit a question. Superintendent Thurmond will be joining us shortly in just a few moments. But for a little context, I want to share with you, this week he made a very emotional statement about the impact of George Floyd's death and the impact on him as a black man, as a father, as a leader of the state's education system. Let's go ahead and listen to that.
Since March 13th, I haven't discussed anything other than the coronavirus and its impacts on education and our response to the coronavirus. But given the gravity of what has happened, it is important to me to take some time away from that work to talk about the important need for us to have racial justice in California and in this country. I have to admit, it has been difficult for me to find my voice, to try to get my mind around such senseless acts that have occurred. It has been difficult for me to make sense of how a man could beg and plead for his life and still have his life snuffed out. It has been hard for me as a black man who every day thinks about the impacts of race. I've struggled to know how and what to say about what has happened in the aftermath and the killing of George Floyd. It has been difficult for me as a parent raising African-American children to know what to say, how to answer their questions when they ask me, Dad, why did this happen? And to know that I have to confront my own vulnerability, that when they ask me, could this happen to them, that I may not be able to keep them safe.
Real raw emotions there from State Superintendent Tony Thurmond, who joins us live right now. We appreciate your time. Superintendent Thurmond, not only did you release a 55-page report this week on the reopening of schools, you are also having to confront a very real issue that many of us parents are dealing with, but you especially. I don't know if you could hear, but we just played for our viewers the statement you made earlier this week talking about your struggles with what to say to your kids about George Floyd and the impact on them. Can you offer us as parents any guidance based on your own introspection and struggles? Because no matter your color, black, white, Asian, Latino, as a parent, you don't know what to say.
Good evening, Kristen, and thank you for the question. There are no clear answers here, and obviously every family has to work on this together. But, you know, I've decided to talk openly with my children about this. They have a lot of questions about how this could happen. They have fears about could this happen to them. And I've expressed my own vulnerability as a parent about, you know, my inabilities to protect them if they're not with me. We've talked openly about what they should do if they're ever confronted in a situation to try and de-escalate the situation so that they can be safe. And what this means to me is that we have to have broad and courageous conversations about race and racism and bias. And we have to have those in our schools. We have to have those in our workplaces. We have to equip educators and students with the tools to do that. And so we're launching a new campaign on dealing with implicit bias in our schools so that we can provide schools with resources on how to talk about it. And we have to provide more counseling to our students. Witnessing this, witnessing police brutality and watching it play out before our eyes, this is a traumatic event. And literally, I've been convening groups of counselors to work with our students to provide them support for this very and real traumatic event that has occurred.
And that trauma sears deeply in the psyches of the school children, even if they don't talk about it. I got to ask you, though, you talked about implicit bias. That exists in teachers, too, because they are also products of the society, right? So stories of African-American students being labeled early on, discouraged from taking advanced courses, maybe suspended more often. Have you encountered those things?
You know, I mean, if you just look at data in our schools, you'll see that there are high rates of suspensions in our schools. I mean, and I'm very sensitive to this because, you know, I served on a school board years ago, and one of the functions of being a school board member is you vote to expel students from school, to me, which is pushing them out. And the trend has been for it to be disproportionately impacting African-American students. And so at some point in my school board career, I just stopped voting for these expulsions because I wanted to see programs that would really help students to re-enter and to get the supports that they need. And it's heartbreaking to hear stories about children as young as preschool, kindergarten, first grade being expelled from school. I don't know what you do to be expelled when you're in kindergarten, but these things have impacts on our students. And so throughout much of my career, I've worked to reduce suspensions and to use programs like restorative justice. So we have ways to support our students. And so, you know, we're talking about implicit bias now to provide training for every educator to be able to work with students, but also to say we've got to go beyond our schools. As you've pointed out, Kristen, bias exists in every sector. And I'm in conversations right now with law enforcement leaders, with government leaders, to say that we've got to have these really deep conversations about addressing unconscious bias wherever it lies.
All right. And of course, for our viewers who don't know, you were a board member in the West Contra Costa Unified School District right here in the Bay Area, right?
That's right. I'm all Bay Area. I love watching the show and have been watching you for years and your work, Kristen. Thank you. And I'm proud to say that when I served on that school board, we reduced our suspensions by 27% in 1 year, mostly using programs like restorative justice. But somebody had to call it out. And I'm honored that my colleagues there joined me in saying, we've got to call out the disproportionality. This is a huge issue across our state.
Well,
and there are laws that...
I'm sorry, don't mean to cut you off, but I do wonder, you know, with 1,000 school districts in California, right, their resources vary so vastly. So what concrete ideas do you have to improve the quality of education in underserved communities?
Well, on the subject of implicit bias, we're building a framework to help educators talk about bias. And many of our educators have shared they want to, but they're not sure how. And that's fair. These are tough conversations and can be very uncomfortable. And so we're building a framework that will provide for school districts to have some of those conversations. There are a lot of great programs that provide an emphasis on social emotional learning. And this is just another way of saying how we teach students empathy, how we teach them empathy for others. It helps to prevent bullying. It helps improve relationships from student to student and students to staff. And so, again, we're working to pull in as many counselors and experts to help our schools at this time.
All right, what about the curriculum? Because you do have some control over that. Are you satisfied with what the kids are learning in school right now about racism, injustice, and the history of immigrants, right? Are they going to be reading more primary sources written by historians of color? Because I got to tell you, you know, looking at an 8th grade textbook that my son used last year, you look at who the editors are, and then you look at how many pages they devote to important periods in history. For example, the Chinese American Exclusionary Act, things like that. You don't get a lot of pages. It doesn't get talked about that much.
We need much more. You're absolutely right. We need a way to use our school curriculum to really recognize the contributions of so many groups that have helped to make America the great country that it is, and especially California. And the State Board of Education, with support from the California Department of Education, has created standards to do this. But ultimately, as you say, with 10,000 schools, it's ultimately up to the school district to make the decision about the final curriculum that gets used. And so we're having some conversations about how to put a refresher on talking about the contributions of various racial and ethnic groups. You know, we do have a curriculum that we are developing to talk about ethnic studies, to talk about the contributions of African Americans and Latinos, Asian Pacific Islander students. We're working on this in real time, and there's actually a bill that would make it a graduation requirement to take ethnic studies. But again, it's ultimately up to the local school district to make sure that there's good content to help our students. Yeah. We got to do more to support Native American students in the contributions that have been made. If you make a curriculum, but you don't back it up with the resources to really teach kids with examples, you might as well, you know, have not passed it. And so that's where we are right now in this state, is really trying to work with the districts that need the resources to do this. As I mentioned, we're working on this ethnic studies curriculum, We think there's a good opportunity to support this from an educational lens.
All right, Superintendent Thurmond, we're going to take a short break on the air, but over on our live stream platforms, I want to talk to you about affirmative action. So join us there if you want to hear this conversation. All right, Superintendent Thurmond, I want to ask you about ACA5, which of course passed the Assembly, now goes to the Senate. And if it passes,
Yes,
then California voters will get a chance to vote on that in November to overturn, if they want, Prop 209, which banned affirmative action, which applies to a lot of things, hiring, but also higher education. I want to ask you what your take is on that.
well, I think this is an exciting time, and congratulations to Assembly Member Dr. Shirley Weber, who introduced the measure. And grateful to my former colleagues in the Assembly, where I served for 4 years, for voting for it. I've already voted for it in the only way I can, and that is by endorsing it as a statewide constitutional officer. And I'm hopeful that if it makes it to the ballot, Californians vote for it. And here's why. We have seen the disproportionate impacts of affirmative action in this state for decades. I've worked in higher education, I've worked in K-12 education, and we have seen the impact that it has had on admissions and the impact that it's had on small and minority and women-owned businesses. This is an opportunity to really make a correction for California, to recognize that these small businesses support California, to recognize that we should be creating opportunities, not barriers, for all students. We're all going to win, regardless of your background. Everyone's going to win, and I think that this is a movement that's headed in the right direction, and I'm very excited and happy to be supporting it.
All right, but what about the argument that affirmative action at the college level sort of relieves the state of its responsibility to ensure really equitable education starting from kindergarten?
Well, I guess I would say that we really haven't experienced equitable education. If you look at the data, there are probably 24 districts in our state, K-12 districts, that have the highest rates of racial segregation and the highest rates of poverty and the highest rates of teachers who have the least amount of experience and in some cases not a credential. Now, I'm not beating up on new teachers. I'm just saying, you cannot have those conditions and expect those students to get a quality education. In this country, we built this country.
Superintendent, let me put you on hold because we're coming back on air. Got
Ready
to
to
do
go.
the TV thing as well.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And we're back with State Schools Superintendent Tony Thurmond. Over in break on Facebook Live, we were talking about the opportunity that may exist for voters to overturn the ban on affirmative action. And I wanted to talk to you also about how to make things equitable, right? When you don't have laptops for everyone. The last time we talked, I think you said you were trying to get 150,000 to meet an immediate need. And then there were some 1.2 million families or kids and households that don't have Wi-Fi. How are you addressing that?
The need is still great. I've got this task force on closing the digital divide that we started right about when the pandemic started. We've made great progress in that many of the internet companies have made free internet available to those who don't have it. They've made a low-cost internet package available where students can get a hotspot, and in many cases, the school district is able to pay the cost. It's very affordable. And so we're making a lot of progress, but we still have many, many students who need a computing device at home and who need internet. And so, again, we're joining all those who are calling on Congress to bring forward, a stimulus package that will allow us to make sure that every one of our students has a computing device and a mobile hotspot while we build the infrastructure to expand the internet in our state. It's critical to distance learning. It's critical to when our schools reopen, and we're making this among our top priorities.
All right, so this week you unveiled a big manual on how California schools can reopen. It's really eye-opening and dramatically different from the school experience that we used to know before the pandemic. So walk us through the major changes, what our kids can expect.
Sure, and I do want to let people know that it's easy to get through the document. It is, 55 pages, but there's an appendix. There is a section that has frequently asked questions. That is a 2-page document that can essentially give you highlights of what's in the 55 pages.
I could have just read that.
You can start there.
Okay,
but
Cliff Notes.
you're like most of our folks are just like our students. They want more information.
Yep.
And so then they can go through each section and read in deeper detail. Here's some of the bottom lines, though. The document says that when schools reopen in almost 2 months, that we may see students wearing a facial covering. We'll see staff wearing a facial covering, and that we must maintain 6 feet of physical distance in terms of spacing of the desks. on transportation. These aren't new concepts. These are things that we've asked people to do in public. But when our schools reopen, we're going to have to open with these social distancing conditions in place to ensure that our students can be safe. People will be taking temperatures to make sure that anyone who demonstrates symptoms is not entering the campus, because we're trying to prevent the further spread of the coronavirus.
Yeah, but in this document, there's some details that I find really interesting and more specific than I've ever heard before. For example, seating on buses, right? No more choosing your own seat. Seat one student to a bench on both sides of the bus, skipping every other row, zigzagging pattern. Boy, there are a lot of specifics here.
Yes, and these really do align with recommendations coming from the Centers for Disease Control. This is the best information we have right now, Kristen. And if things change, and we find ourselves in a better place where we don't have to have these same considerations, then we will change this guidance. This guidance will continue to be, we're working with districts on how to implement it. We're helping them figure out 6 feet of space on campus. What's the size of your classroom? How many students can you manage? But right now, this is the best information that we know about how to keep our students safe. That's our top priority. And then to help take care of their emotional needs, again, because they're coming back to school at a time in a way that's very different than they've ever experienced before. And we're helping our schools to work through it.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, no field trips, no assemblies. Is that the recommendation?
That continues to be the recommendation. The way it works in this state is that our county health officers, is one for each of our 58 counties, and then a few of our cities have their own. Our county health officers ultimately make decisions about the size of any assembly. How many people is too many? If you look at the example from our recent high school graduations, most of our school districts have moved to virtual graduations or the car parade graduation, where the graduate steps out for a moment, they have their moment, their family's in the car, and then they have to drive off. Again, this is because we're following the guidance that ultimately comes from the Centers for Disease Control and other places. And it says you got to keep the size of any gathering small to help prevent the spread of the coronavirus. So, we'll continue to monitor. If things change, then we can get back to field trips and assemblies. But for now, it's 6 feet of space, which means you're probably going to see class sizes about 10 to 15, depending on the size of the campus.
Okay, so a decrease in, the size, class size, and then you're talking about masks for everybody, staff, obviously students, and also maybe more buses to accommodate the physical distancing. So a viewer wants to know, with all these things, and quite frankly, I want to know, with the state budget proposing a cut to education, how are you going to make these things happen?
This is a real challenge. The good news is here, the governor made a commitment just a few days ago to provide facial coverings and hand sanitizer. By my last count, I think about 30 counties already have had their personal protective equipment delivered to them so that they can disseminate it to the schools in each of their counties. And so we're pretty sure that's going to be completed pretty soon. Clearly, there's some challenges in our state budget. Our legislature is going to make some final decisions by the 15th of this month. A lot depends on whether or not we get a federal stimulus. But we know that the only way our schools can do this is to have the resources in the state budget for the personal protective equipment. Let's face it, students will forget to bring a face covering.
Right.
Staff will forget to bring a face covering. How many times have you gone to the grocery store and you forgot it in your car or you forgot it at home? We have to envision these scenarios. And you're absolutely right. The state is going to have to provide the resources to help our schools prepare. All
right, Tony, a lot of schools seem to be talking about a hybrid model where you go to school physically 1 or 2 days a week, and then the rest of the time you're, at home. I've heard from some teachers that they're worried about going physically and being exposed to the kids and maybe getting COVID. And then there's a parent on Facebook saying, why can't schools just continue to do it online? So I guess my question is, do people have a choice? Let's say their school says, this is our structure. Can you, as the parent or the teacher, say, I'm just not comfortable with that?
Well, again, this is an area where every one of our 1,000 school districts in the state makes their own decisions. And so far, what we've heard from most school districts is that they are surveying their parents to find out how many of them want in-class instruction and how many want to continue with a kind of distance learning or remote learning. Now, we know there's some students, this isn't a choice. Their parents have to work. If you're the children of essential workers, your parents have to work. And so we've got to provide a safe offering for our students. But distance learning is interesting for those parents who are asking for it, we're suggesting that districts honor as much of it as you can, because that helps naturally as a strategy to keep the number of students who are on campus smaller.
Right,
Smaller
right.
size means better safety. And so in this case, distance learning can be very helpful. We know that some families prefer it, and we want to support how that can be rolled out successfully.
All right, Superintendent Thurmond, thank you so much. We're going to take a break on the air. We're done with Superintendent Thurmond on the air, but we're going to just chat a couple more minutes on, oh, no, we're out of time. Okay, you're a very busy man. Thank you so much for your time today. Take care. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk to someone from Street Code. Really interesting. If you haven't heard of them, you should, because Steph Curry feels like this organization is the future and supports them. We featured Street Code just a few weeks ago on this show. They're addressing inequity in access to education and technology. We're going to share some of that interview with you next.
In commercial break.
All right. Oh, Superintendent, you're still here? I thought you had to go. It was a hard out. But I want to say something.
Yes, ma'am.
I think, were in Philadelphia when I was working there as a reporter on Action News. Is that right?
I remember. I honestly remember.
Yeah.
I was in Philly for 20 some years, and I started my social work career there. And then I moved to San Francisco, and they said Kristen Z, and I thought, I know Kristen Z from Action News.
Yeah. Jim Gardner, Mark
Jim
Howard,
Gardner.
Lisa Thomas Laurie, everybody knows him, of course, yeah.
Don Tollefson. I know that's an old school name, but I remember Action News. I still have family in Philly. But you're a Bay Area person who moved to Philly?
Yes,
or?
I'm like you. Born here, went there, now I'm back. Your folks say you got to go, so thank you very much. Appreciate it. Talk again next time.
I never leave until you dismiss me. I sit here until you say we're clear and then I can go, just like our students.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thank you. All right, Superintendent Thurmond, always good to talk with him and hear some of the latest in terms of how they plan to reopen schools in California. The state offering a 55-page guideline. I did not realize there was a 2-page cheat sheet that I could have started with, but that's okay. I always say when I was in school, I didn't want to read the Cliff Notes before I read the actual book. That takes away from the enjoyment of it. But I do recommend that you take a look and check it out, because it's got some really specific guidelines that you might want to share with your kids, just so they're not surprised, or you're not surprised when your district comes to you and says this is what we're looking at doing. All right, really excited coming back on air, because we're going to share part of a conversation Steph Curry had with one of the founders of a great local group working to make sure everybody learns how to code.
Back in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
Welcome back. Street Code Academy is working to ensure people of color in East Palo Alto and surrounding areas get access to technology and education. They've held over 40,000 hours of technology classes and helped thousands of members of the community, including giving them free laptops. It's a cause that Warriors superstar Steph Curry supported publicly this week. He joined one of the co-founders of Street Code, Squint, and we want to share part of their conversation with you. And if you want to donate, volunteer your time or resources, or take free coding classes, just go to their website, streetcode.us.
Bringing, Riley's 7, and so we brought her, felt like she could handle, the walk, but just the environment of being, a part of something as special as that, and speaking on behalf of people that now can't speak for themselves, and understanding like what the issues are to them, that we're fighting for, so that they don't have to fight for. And so she was asking us crazy questions. She knew who George Floyd was. She didn't know about Breonna Taylor when we got to the protests, and as they were giving the speeches, and we were kind of educating her as she had questions, because we didn't want to overwhelm her with information, just kind of let her absorb as much as she could. I think by the time about halfway through the protest, like she was leading chants and, saying their name and saying Black Lives Matter, and going with a couple of her friends from school. And that's a moment I know she'll remember for a long time, in terms of one, the diversity of people that were out there, speaking on behalf of, change for the Black experience. And for her, I know that's going to be hopefully a life-changing perspective, even at 7. In Oakland, where my wife put it, she wrote it so eloquently. I think one of her IG posts this last week was about maybe a mile into walking around Lake Merritt. she realized that this was the same route that we took the parades on. And she was like, it's amazing, it's overwhelming, and it's sad to think that we had 1 million people out there celebrating, us winning a championship. And now fast forward, 4.5, 5 years later, we're protesting social injustices that have been around for forever. And we're all trying to use this moment to, change generations. And like, she started crying like right around that point, because it was like, why can't we have that same energy and same excitement about something that's dealing with humans and their experiences, and valuing, people of all different backgrounds, valuing what the Black community has given to this country for, since they brought us here. And so like that part of it was crazy. And so like having that experience with my brothers that came out, and seeing Juan lead that the way he did, it was awesome to see. And
I don't know if this went out, but there's like a memo maybe to like everyone that wasn't Black to like call your Black friends and be like, hey, are you okay? Anyway, like we got it all on the same day. And I was like, like, 150 like white people asking me, am I okay?
Yeah.
And I was like exhausted, I'm not gonna lie. Like, it's like, I was like, this has been, not only has this been my whole life, this has been my mother's life, my father, like my grandmother, like this has been my great grandmother, like this has been our life. And so now it's like, do you want to, like, I just want to talk. It's like, man, I really am not in the place to really want to talk about it, because I'm talking about it. Like, I feel like I've been talking my whole life. Now it's just listen to us, like don't, and I know people are trying to find a solution and trying to find a remedy, but I think we have to have the hard conversations, and we're not going to get through this in a couple of months. Like, be willing to like adjust your life for this to be now on, like where it's like, I have to be very mindful, even myself, it's like we have to be honest. And like you said, love is a key factor. And I think when you think about that, like, it's because you love something, you're compelled to want to give your all to see them advance. You know what I'm saying?
That was just a small part of the larger conversation Squint had with Stephen Curry. You can watch the interview, donate, learn, and get more information at streetcode.us. We'll be right back.
In commercial break.
All right, Facebook friends, hope you enjoyed that segment. That really open and just such a normal heart-to-heart conversation between two friends. Squint is an accomplished filmmaker, photographer, and storyteller, and as such, he is friends with Steph. And they marched together in Palo Alto last Saturday. And Squint also got some beautiful pictures from the protests that are powerful, moving, impactful, and haunting. So I encourage you to take a look. They're very optimistic and hopeful as well. And the conversation with Steph, there was a lot more about that, as well as Steph's support for education and coding. Oh, and here is Squint's IG page, which you may want to follow. I highly suggest you do. Just amazing photos, and each one tells a story. Just, very moving. And a lot of his work is in black and white. But he had that conversation with Steph Curry, and I think everybody will have some takeaway from it. I know I certainly did. So check it out. In Street Code Academy, totally awesome group. If you know someone from the underserved community who could benefit or enjoy coding classes, entrepreneurship classes, the fellowship of being together and learning together, please check them out, Street Code Academy. And also, they could use laptops in their efforts. So if you know someone who could donate, or if you like to contribute, whether it's resources or time, again, I highly advise you check out this group, which is just terrific and has been quietly doing such great work in the Palo Alto, East Palo Alto, Menlo Park, Redwood City area. Thousands of students have graduated from their classes. Oh, they have many apps that their students have created. So it's all cool stuff. All right, we're going to come back on air shortly and wrap up our program today. Really, it's been an interesting conversation. So glad you've been with us.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
And welcome back. I want to thank you so much for joining us on this interactive show, Getting Answers today. Hopefully you felt like you learned something from my conversation with Superintendent Tony Thurmond. We'll be here every day at 3 o'clock on air and on live stream answering your questions. Facebook Live, YouTube Live, ABC7news.com. World News Tonight is next. Take care. All right. Thank you for joining us on Facebook today. See you next time.